It was the dead of winter, the kind of night where the air outside feels sharp enough to cut you. The snow had been falling since early evening, coating everything in a thick, undisturbed blanket of white. I was alone in my small one-story house on the outskirts of town, far from streetlights, far from the noise of traffic. The kind of place you'd think is safe until the quiet starts to feel oppressive. I had spent the night watching old TV shows under a thick blanket, with my only light coming from the flicker of the screen. Around midnight, the heater kicked in, its low hum lulling me into a drowsy haze. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, the TV screen was dark, and the only light in the room came from the dim glow of my digital clock. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not hurried, not loud, just 3 slow, deliberate knocks against my front door. I sat frozen, every muscle tense. No one knocks at this hour unless it's an emergency, or something far worse. At first, I thought maybe I had imagined it. The wind had been howling earlier. Maybe a branch had hit the siding. But then it came again. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced. I reached for my phone. I didn't turn on the flashlight. Some deep instinct told me not to. Instead, I sat motionless, listening. My heart was beating so loudly it felt like the sound might give me away. Slowly, I crept toward the front window and pulled the curtain back a fraction of an inch. That's when I saw her. A woman stood in the snow facing my door. Her hair was wet, hanging in limp strands across her face. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress that clung heavily to her as if it had been soaked through. The fabric looked decades out of place. Pale, frayed lace and layers that belonged in an antique photograph. She didn't move, didn't shiver. Just stood there, her head tilted slightly to one side as though she was listening. Then in the faint glow of the porch light, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too stretched. A smile that felt practiced, wrong, as though she had seen one once and was imitating it. She stepped forward and knocked again, slow and deliberate, her knuckles scraping lightly against the wood between each thud. My first thought was to call the police, but something about her, the way she didn't look cold despite the snow, the way her clothes clung but her skin was bone dry, made me hesitate. My second thought was to check the doorbell camera feed on my phone. When I opened the app, it showed no motion detected. The timestamp was correct, the snow was there, but the woman wasn't. My stomach turned cold. I peeked again through the curtain. She was closer now, no more than a step away from the door. Her smile never changed. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the door like she was standing right next to me. "It's so cold out here. Won't you let me in?" Her words were deliberate, as if she had rehearsed them. I didn't respond. I didn't move. And then her voice changed. It grew deeper. Not just deeper, layered like more than one voice speaking at once. "I know you're awake." I stumbled backward, heart pounding. I bolted to my bedroom, slammed the door and locked it. I stayed there in the dark, gripping a heavy lamp like a weapon. Every few minutes I thought I heard faint scraping on the walls, but I told myself it was my imagination. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to check the front porch. The snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anyone had stood there all night. The only thing out of place was the doormat. It had been turned upside down. It was just past midnight when Mia remembered she'd left her phone charger in the living room. She sighed, reluctant to leave the warmth of her bed, but her phone battery was at 2%, and she couldn't risk sleeping without it charging, especially with work calls scheduled early in the morning. Her apartment was a simple one-bedroom unit with a short hallway connecting the bedroom to the living room and kitchen. She knew it like the back of her hand, so she didn't bother turning on the lights. The soft glow from the street lamp outside was usually enough to guide her. But tonight something felt off. The moment she stepped into the hallway, she noticed that the living room doorway seemed further away than usual. Not drastically so, just enough to make her hesitate. Weird, she thought, shaking it off. I'm just tired. She took a few steps forward, expecting the living room to come closer. Instead, it stayed the same distance away. The air around her felt heavier, colder, and the familiar hum of her refrigerator in the kitchen faded into an unsettling silence. In its place came a faint static, like the sound of an untuned radio somewhere in the walls. Halfway down, she turned to glance back at her bedroom. That's when her chest tightened. Her bedroom door was now the same distance away as the living room, like she was stuck in the middle of a hallway that was stretching on both ends. She whispered to herself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." The light above her flickered. Shadows shifted unnaturally across the walls, elongating in strange, jagged shapes. And then she heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps behind her. They matched her pace exactly. Mia froze, listening. The footsteps stopped too. Her breath quickened. She took one cautious step forward. The footsteps followed, heavier this time, like someone much larger was walking barefoot just a few steps behind her. She wanted to turn around to see who or what was there. But something deep in her gut screamed, "Don't look." She quickened her pace. The footsteps did the same. Panic took over. She broke into a run, her feet slapping against the floor, the sound of the other steps growing louder, faster, closer. No matter how hard she ran, the living room never seemed to get nearer. Then, in one desperate stride, she suddenly crossed the threshold. The second her foot hit the living room carpet, the hallway snapped back to its normal length. She spun around. There was no one behind her, just her bedroom door, exactly where it should be. Her hands trembled as she snatched her charger from the coffee table. She didn't bother turning off the light. She bolted back into her bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. Hours later, sometime before dawn, her eyes drifted shut. She was just on the edge of sleep when she heard it again. Those same slow, measured footsteps. This time, they weren't in the hallway. They were right outside her bedroom door. Liam had always dreaded visiting his grandmother's house as a child. It wasn't that she was unkind. She was sweet, in fact. But the house itself seemed to weigh on him. The air always felt thicker inside, like it was pressing down on his chest. The creaking floorboards groaned like they were warning him with each step, and the shadows in the corners never felt quite still. When his grandmother passed away, the house was left to him. Most people would have sold it, but Liam thought maybe living there would be a way to feel close to her again. He told himself the unease he remembered was just childhood imagination. Adults didn't get scared of old houses, right? For the first few days, it was quiet. Too quiet. He avoided going into certain rooms, especially the living room, where the floor was uneven and the boards bowed slightly underfoot. The place was drafty, with the occasional sound of the old pipes knocking, but nothing that set off alarm bells. Then came the rainy Thursday night. Liam was on the couch reading when he heard it for the first time. Soft, muffled, but unmistakably human. A voice. It came from beneath him. At first he froze, listening so hard his ears began to ache. Maybe it was just the wind. But then it came again. Liam! His name. Slowly drawn out, the syllables dragging like they were heavy. The sound was breathy, wet somehow, and low enough that he felt it in his chest more than he heard it in his ears. He leaned forward, lowering his ear toward the floor. The voice came again, closer this time, and with it, a faint rhythmic sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. He jerked back, heart hammering, his brain scrambling for an explanation. The rational part of him screamed, "Ignore it. Just ignore it." But curiosity, or maybe something darker, pulled him toward the kitchen, where he grabbed a flashlight and a pry bar. The living room floorboards were old and stubborn, but he managed to wedge one up. Beneath it, he expected to see the dirt crawl space or maybe some forgotten storage area. Instead, he saw nothing. A narrow black void that seemed to drop far deeper than the house's foundation should allow. Cold air surged upward, bringing with it the smell of damp earth and something else, sweet and rotting, like old flowers left too long in stagnant water. "Liam," the voice whispered again, but this time it wasn't muffled. It was close, too close. It didn't sound like a call anymore, it sounded like an invitation. He shone the flashlight into the gap. At first he saw nothing but darkness. Then, movement. A pale hand sliding upward from the shadows. The fingers were impossibly long, the skin stretched thin over the bone, nails jagged and black. They curled over the edge of the floorboards with slow, deliberate intent, scraping the wood. Liam's breath caught. His mind screamed to run, but his body wouldn't listen. He kept the beam of light steady, even as the hand retreated back into the darkness, replaced by something worse. A face, hollow cheeks, skin gray and mottled, lips pulled into a grin so wide it seemed to strain the jaw. The eyes were the worst, huge, glassy, and wet, staring straight at him. And then, in a voice that was now right in his ear, it whispered, "You're standing where I died." The words sent a cold spike straight down his spine. He staggered backward, tripping over the coffee table. By the time he scrambled to his feet, the plank was back in place. He didn't remember putting it there. His flashlight was gone, as if it had been pulled into the void. That night, Liam barely slept. Every time his eyes began to close, he heard it again. The whisper, the scratching, just beneath the boards. And in the nights that followed, it never stopped. Never louder, never quieter. Just waiting, night after night, for the moment he'd give in and lift the floor again. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.